When people talk about Perfect Blue, they usually describe it as a descent into madness, a psychological breakdown, a fractured identity, a woman losing her grip on reality. And that's a powerful way to read it. You could argue that what we're watching is the inside of a mind collapsing, reality bending as a person struggles to hold herself together. But I want to start somewhere slightly different. Instead of asking what's happening inside of Mima, I want to ask what's happening around her. Because from the very beginning, Perfect Blue doesn't just feel unstable psychologically, it feels unstable structurally. As viewers, we feel disoriented, and our instinct is to diagnose the character. But maybe the instability isn't just internal, maybe it's environmental. Maybe the film isn't only asking what happens when a mind fractures. Maybe it's asking what happens when a person becomes inseparable from how she's seen. Is Mima losing herself, or is something else shaping who she's allowed to be? In Perfect Blue, everything feels unstable, scenes don't flow normally, time feels broken, reality and performance blur together without warning. As viewers, we feel disoriented, and our first instinct is to say she's losing her mind. But before we call it madness, maybe we should look at something else. Maybe this isn't just a story about psychological collapse. Maybe it's about what happens when a person becomes separated from their own image. This isn't just a mental crisis, it's an identity crisis. A question of what happens when your public version starts replacing your private self. To understand that, I want to bring in Jacques Lacan. Lacan believed we don't discover ourselves from the inside. We build our identity by seeing ourselves reflected back, first in mirrors and later in other people. As babies, when we first recognize ourselves in a mirror, we see a complete, stable version of ourselves. But inside, we're messy and fragmented. That mirror image feels more whole than we actually feel. So, we identify with the image, and that's how identity begins, through a kind of misrecognition. We become what we see, but the image is always outside us. In Perfect Blue, mirrors are everywhere: dressing rooms, windows, screens, reflections in cars. Mima constantly sees herself, but it's never quite her. Slowly, her idol self becomes something separate. Idol Mima is perfect. She's smiling, pure confident. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't doubt. The real Mima does. The idol version becomes like an ideal image, the version the world recognizes and accepts. And recognition matters. According to Lacan, we become who we are through how others see us. Identity is shaped socially. For Mima, that social recognition is huge. It's fans, it's producers, it's cameras, it's the internet. Mima's room, the blog, is especially disturbing. It describes her life in detail. It predicts her feelings. It writes her thoughts. It creates a version of her that exists publicly without her control. And here's what's terrifying. That version starts to feel more real than her own lived experience. This is where Jean Baudrillard comes in. Baudrillard argued that in modern society, we no longer live in reality first and representation second. Instead, simulations, images, media, copies start replacing reality itself. He calls this hyperreality. In hyperreality, the copy doesn't just reflect the real thing, it replaces it. Idol Mima is hyper-real. She's more polished than the actress, more stable than the real person, more consistent than the private self. She exists in posters, recordings, choreography, fan memories. She can be replayed infinitely. she doesn't change. She doesn't contradict herself. She's frozen at her most desirable point. When Mima tries to become an actress, she disrupts that image. She takes on darker roles, sexual roles, complicated roles, and the world resists. The fans resist, the industry resists, and Rumi resists most violently of all. Rumi isn't just obsessed, she's defending the image. She wants idol Mima preserved forever. In a strange way, she's loyal to the copy over the real person. That's hyperreality. Throughout the film, reality and performance become impossible to separate. A stage rape scene feels just as intense and chaotic as real violence. Scenes cut without warning, sets and apartments look identical. We usually interpret this as Mima's mental breakdown, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's what happens when every part of your life is mediated, filmed, watched, edited, and consumed. If everything is performance, what counts as real? Mima starts doubting her own memories because the blog's version feels more coherent. The idol version feels cleaner. The TV scripts feel structured. Real life feels messy and inconsistent. And in a world dominated by media, coherence wins. The version that circulates is the version that survives. By the end, after everything, Mima looks into her car's rearview mirror and says, "I'm the real thing." It sounds calm, confident, but notice something important. She says it to her real reflection. The image comes first, the statement comes after. Through Lacan, this could mean she's stabilizing herself by identifying with her image again. Through Baudrillard, it's more unsettling. In a hyperreal world, being real isn't about discovering authenticity. It's about asserting it convincingly. Saying "I'm real" becomes part of the performance. It almost sounds like branding. That doesn't mean she's insane, but it also doesn't mean she's fully healed. It suggests something else. To survive, she has to create a version of herself that can exist within the system of images. So maybe Perfect Blue isn't mainly about losing your sanity. Maybe it's about losing control over your own image. Once your image starts circulating independently, once it gains power, you have to negotiate with it. And that's the unsettling question the film leaves us with. Does the world override Mima, or does Mima retreat into the world of images? The film never answers. It leaves her and is suspended between reality and reflection, between who we are and who the world sees. And maybe that's the real horror, not madness, but the possibility that the image was always in control.
Hello, my name is XXAte, or you can call me X, and I'll be proposing the alternative ideology to Basque. Being that Mima is still within a mind, a dream, or a memory. This may be hard to believe, but I assure you I have evidence to prove as such. Draw Perfect Blue, we see Mima Kirigoe loaf around and weave in and out of reality and insanity. We first see a disparity in time when Mima opens a door, and it match cuts with a scene of her and her manager walking in out to a plethora of paparazzi. This scene is at the 8-minute and 58 mark and predates a lot of the more crazy scenes. However, to overlook this will be a mistake, a grave mistake, as this shows that even before it all, time and reality are already meshing for poor Mima because of her busy work schedule and the stress of work. If you worked any long hours consecutively, this is truly how it feels. We get a profusion of scenes throughout Perfect Blue that match cut reality and memory, such as scenes of Mima in the club, on the TV show, and scenes with her alternative self, pop star Mima. However, we eventually find out the one doing the murders isn't Mima's superfan, but actually Rumi. This is then followed up by a chase scene through the streets of Tokyo, Minato, in Minami Ayoma, climaxing in a crescendo where Rumi almost gets hit by a truck but Mima saves her, and they both pass out from blood loss. The next scene is Mima in a psychiatric hospital, talking to the doctor about Rumi switching between her personalities, as she has dissociative identity disorder, DID for short. But Mima says something very engrossing. But thanks to her, I am who I am today. Implying what exactly? I hypothesized that they switched personalities within the reality bending scenes. This is further proved by the last two scenes of the movie, where two nurses canard about Mima, wondering if it is really her. Oh my gosh, that girl looks just like Mima Kyoge. You're lying. There's no way Mima Kyoge would be here out of all places. Maybe she's just a look-alike. Mima overhears it all, and when she steps into a vehicle and looks into a rearview mirror, staring at us, the audience, she says so boldly, "No, I am the real thing." This line in the original Japanese dub is delivered by Rika Matsumoto. Who is that? She's Rumi's voice actor. The final line spoken by Mima is delivered through Rumi's voice, collapsing the boundary that the film appears to rebuild. Mima is Rumi, and Rumi is Mima. What first reads as a twist instead begins to feel like a merging, an identity that never fully separated in the first place. The interpretation gains weight when placed alongside the philosophical ideas of Gilles Deleuze and Alain Badiou on reality. Deleuze proposes that reality is not fixed but constantly shifting, shaped by memory and perception. What we recognize as real is simply the version of events that stabilizes long enough to make sense. Mima's experience mirrors this instability. Her identity is not singular but multiple: idol, actress, victim, and observer. The boundaries between memory, performance, and present experience collapse, implying that even scenes that appear external may exist inside an ongoing psychological process. Through these lenses, Mima never exits her memories. She moves within them as they continue reshaping who she is. Badiou extends this idea by arguing that reality holds its structure until an event disrupts it and produces a new truth. In Perfect Blue, this event is the collapse of identity between Mima and Rumi. The revelation does not separate illusion from reality. Instead, it creates a new condition where both identities coexist. Mima's final declaration, "I'm the real thing," functions less as proof and more as commitment, a decision to inhabit one version of truth after the rupture. Taken together, these philosophical views shift the ending from resolution to ambiguity. If reality is fluid, as Deleuze suggests, and is rewritten by transformative events, as Badiou argues, then Mima's story is not about escaping madness, but learning to live with it. The car scene becomes an act of stabilization. Mima is not cured or clarified, but she's simply choosing which identity can move forward. A psychological perspective deepens this further through Elizabeth Loftus, whose research demonstrates that memory is reconstructive rather than archival. Each recall reshapes the past through emotion, suggestion, and later experience. Under this framework, the film's shifting scenes resemble evolving recollection rather than objective events. Violence, performance, and even character presence can operate as memory fragments, reorganizing themselves. Mima is therefore not trapped in illusion, but inside an ongoing rewriting of her own narrative. Her final line reads as the moment a memory solidifies into belief. Reality becomes the version she can sustain. This leads naturally into the idea of fragmentation explored by Pierre Janet, who argued that disassociation divides overwhelmingly experience into compartments. These identities and fragments holding memories and emotions that the core self cannot process simultaneously. The movie Reality Shifts marks the points where these compartments bleed into one another. If Mima remains within her memories, it's because disassociation does not erase experience. It redistributes it. Final mirror scene then represents not the end of fragmentation, but its most stable configuration, a mind arranging itself into a form that can continue. In the end, this movie was just a psychosis, nightmare fuel. But that is my ideology that I pose to you today.